Hello, and welcome to the Geopolitics Explained podcast. Last episode, I discussed how global trade is going to break into regional blocs in the future. In this system, megacities will act as the nodes that will facilitate this system, and Asia, possessing 15 out of 20 of the world's current busiest ports by volume, would be set to benefit in such a world. However, the trump card here is the US dollar. Beijing and the rest of Asia cannot fully insulate themselves from it because it's ingrained in global trade. A period of de-dollarisation is underway, but this will unfold over decades, not weeks or months. So as we zoom out and take a grand strategy view towards the world of trade and finance, how powerful is the US dollar today? To understand this, we're first going to look at past reserve currency systems and how they rose and fell. Just as there are some signs of the dollar declining today, currency systems of the past eventually also declined and faded. When they were first established, these currencies were a medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. So, which such systems have we seen in the past, and how did they eventually fade? Firstly, if we travel back to ancient Greece, the Athenian Drachma was spread across Athens' maritime empire. Silver mines in the empire gave Athens a steady supply of silver, but this currency system suffered when Athens lost power in the Peloponnesian War of 404 BC. As a result, this was a politically forced collapse due to Athens losing its dominance. Moving on, and we have the Roman Empire. Roman coins were accepted across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, and they were backed by Rome's fiscal military system. This system was upheld by taxes and trade, and the initial strong silver and gold content in the coins ensured trust. However, currency debasement occurred when the silver content was reduced in these coins. This caused inflationary pressures, and the currency lost value. As a result, there was a loss of confidence, and merchants demanded gold or other currencies in response. So, this time round, the collapse of the Roman currency system was forced by inflation from overspending and weak governance. Next, we have the Byzantine Empire. The solidus was introduced by Constantine I in the year 312. It notably saw nearly unchanged gold content for nearly 700 years. This led to the currency system earning unmatched trust versus previous currency systems that we've discussed. The Byzantine solidus was widely used as a medium of exchange across Europe, the Islamic world, and Asia. However, by the 11th century, the empire faced financial strain from wars and territorial losses. The solidus was debased into the hyperpyron, thus losing stability and credibility. So the decline here was forced by inflation and decline in imperial power. Next, we move on to the Islamic caliphates. The Islamic dinar and dirham spread with the rapid expansion of the Islamic caliphates. The store of value was maintained through consistent gold and silver standards, and taxes and trade contracts being denominated in the currencies also ensured that the system remained as a unit of account. The fall of this system started with the fragmentation of the caliphate, Mongol invasions, and the rise of Italian maritime republics, saw the centre of global trade shift to Europe. As a result, this decline was political and structural, and a consequence of imperial decline. Speaking of the Italian maritime republics, and the florin of Florence and the ducat of Venice were currencies that emerged when these two city-states emerged as financial hubs in the 13th century. These financial networks spread across Europe and the Mediterranean. Once again, it was strong gold content in these coins that made them a trusted store of value. However, the rise of other nation states in Spain, Portugal, and the Netherlands eventually eclipsed those in Florence and Venice. So this decline wasn't inflationary, it was due to a loss of economic primacy as stronger maritime powers emerged. By the 17th century, the Dutch Republic became Europe's financial hub. The Dutch guilder is officially recognised as the first global reserve currency system. The Amsterdam Exchange Bank standardised payments and pioneered central banking, and at the same time, the Dutch East India Company created huge trade flows and spread the guilder on a global level. The fall of the Dutch global reserve currency system was triggered by the British, who were becoming a stronger geopolitical power, especially in naval realms and financial realms. The Anglo-Dutch Wars further eroded Dutch influence. The guilder eventually faded as a unit of account in global trade and was replaced by the pound sterling. So this decline was forced by geopolitical competition. From the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution fueled the British rise as a global superpower. London became the world's financial centre, and the gold standard anchored the pound as a trusted store of value. As a result, most global trade was invoiced in sterling. The decline of the pound started with the end of the gold standard in the aftermath of World War I. So this decline was partly due to inflation and high war debts, but it was also due to political and economic decline in comparison to the United States. In the aftermath of World War II, the British pound's decline was finally confirmed. The United States wrote the rules of the New World Order through the Bretton Woods system in 1944. So the pound losing its reserve currency status took decades here. Are we potentially seeing the US dollar undergo the same fate? At Bretton Woods, the United States pegged the dollar to gold, and then other currencies were pegged to the US dollar. After 1971, the Nixon shock saw the United States end the dollar's peg to gold. Thanks to US Treasuries and the petrodollar system, the US dollar global reserve currency survived. The deep, liquid US financial markets also reinforced the currency's strength. However, today, there are some warning signs that are beginning to emerge with the role of the US dollar as global reserve currency. Repeated US deficits and rising debts are a concern. This is especially true during periods of rising inflation. Interest rates will rise in response to rising inflation in attempts to limit spending, but rising interest rates raise the cost of repaying US debts. This is a worry, and we've recently seen the United States credit ratings reduced by the three major credit rating agencies. We're also seeing geopolitical adversaries seeking to diversify away from the US dollar. At the onset of the Russia-Ukraine war, the United States confiscated all Russian foreign exchange reserves that were held in US dollars. This woke up many nations that had been sleepwalking through a global reserve currency system blindly. If the position of the United States was threatened in any way, the global reserve currency system is clearly a tool that they could weaponize because they've already done it. Because the age of globalization saw a borderless world promoted, always having reserves held in US dollars was the easy thing to do. But in recent years, it's been clear that this makes nations vulnerable. Today, some nations, especially the BRICS bloc, have recognized this, and they are rapidly buying gold in response. This allows nations to trade with other countries in their own currencies. But the issue in the past was that if India traded with the United Arab Emirates, for example, India would then collect reserves of dirham, which is the currency of the UAE. Countries could hold on to these reserves to trade with the country in question in the future, but today there is another option that countries can undertake. This is where gold comes in. Countries can head to the Shanghai Gold Exchange and they can swap these currencies for gold. Since gold is scarce, durable, portable, and divisible, it is a trusted store of value. Throughout history, when crises such as currency collapse or war have emerged, people have often reverted to gold for safety. With global supply only growing a few percentage points per annum, gold is also more resistant to sudden inflationary shocks. But ultimately, today, the dollar is set to remain as the top dog because there is a lack of alternatives with sufficient liquidity and trust. Dedollarisation in trade settlements is occurring, and we can see that nations are trying to reduce their share of US dollar reserves held at central banks. There will be no overnight collapse of the US dollar and its global reserve currency system, but the gradual erosion of dominance has begun. It's worthwhile exploring the previous reserve currency systems because there are a few repeating trends that we've seen arise. Firstly, many assume that inflation would be the death of many global reserve currencies. This has been a feature of collapsing currencies throughout history. Think of the Weimar inflation and Hungary at the end of World War II, or Zimbabwe, Argentina, or Venezuela in more recent times. Whether this inflationary pressure has been triggered by wars, an economic collapse, or money printing, these events had a common trend. They eventually led to the introduction of a new currency, or alternative currencies were allowed to become legal tender in those countries. In recent years, local currencies collapsing has seen countries dollarize. This would then see the US dollar become acceptable legal tender in these countries. But inflation isn't the only way that global reserve currencies can collapse. Alternatively, as was seen throughout history, declining geopolitical power also results in the eventual decline of global reserve currency systems. The clear takeaway here is that currency systems don't die of inflation alone. They can also fade when geopolitical power shifts. There are signs of this occurring today, as we've been discussing in this series on the Indo-Pacific. As I've discussed in the last few episodes, the United States is reactive to its problems and attempts to pursue short-term fixes when problems emerge, whereas China specifically focuses on the long term. So the US dollar today faces clear burdens, but it does have options because it is the global reserve currency. This is often referred to the dollar as being the cleanest dirty sheet. For now, the world remains this way, but one day in the future, could we see the dollar give way? If it does, will it be through a lack of trust? Will it be through inflationary pressures? Or will the United States fade as a geopolitical power? Next week, I'll continue to explore this specific battle for control between the United States dollar and potential replacements for its dominance. I'll also explore if the United States could potentially reverse this geopolitical decline. Can the dollar regain trust as global reserve currency, or has the rise of the multipolar world and the emerging regionalisation of global trade sealed its fate? There has also been a lot occurring in geopolitics recently, and so one episode next week will cover a range of topics, including Iran and the potential implementation of UN sanctions once again due to the snapback mechanism. I'll also explore the current US-Venezuela tensions spiking off the coast of Venezuela. I'll dive into the recognition of Palestine and updates in the Middle East, and then I'll finally discuss the SCO summit and the meeting involving many world leaders, including Xi, Kim, and Vladimir Putin. If those sound of interest to you, make sure you keep an eye out. These 2 episodes will likely be released next Tuesday and next Friday. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this episode, why not leave a review on the podcast platform of your choice? I've been Dylan. I'll talk to you next time.